You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your host, and as I like to say, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. That's me. I came up with it. Nobody else ever did it.
And what's your name? Because you didn't share your name as a host.
Oh, Abraham.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hi, Abraham. And I'm one of your hosts, Shane, who I always like to say, those who believe in telekinetics, raise my hand. That's my favorite quote of myself.
We are a psychology podcast.
Psychology.
Yeah.
I love psychology. Psychology. That's what it is.
That's right. Psychology podcast. And we like to talk about everything related to human behavior, animal behavior, and the things that we do and why we do them, essentially. We like to do this through the medium of sound and comedy and science and entertainment, generally speaking. We're trying to teach you everything there is to know about the world through a psychological or psychological lens.
And also, if you've ever hit our historical episodes, those are typically branded as why we've done what we've done. And then when we do get into time travel, that will be why we'll do what we will do.
That's right. So if you're joining us for the first time, this is probably abrupt, but thank you for being here.
Yeah.
We're already having fun.
Yeah.
And today we're going to actually be talking about, I didn't come up with what you miss 100% of shots you don't take. That was Wayne Gretzky. I was plagiarizing him because that's our topic for today.
No, and I said what I said. No, that's a Kurt Vonnegut quote. We were talking about him at the beginning of the show, or before we even started. So definitely go read him. But yeah, we're talking about plagiarism. And as both of us working in academic settings, we've probably seen a little bit of this. So I'm excited to talk about this on some level. Yeah.
Probably done a little bit of it too.
Mm-hmm. Ooh.
Just kidding. Obviously not. But anyway, that is what we're talking about. And I'm excited to dig into this one. I don't have much more preamble. I guess I would say that if you like what you hear today, you would like to support the show, consider joining us on Patreon, pick up some merch, like and subscribe, share it with friends, all that stuff. We'll talk more about that at the end. Is there any more preamble that I'm missing, Shane?
No, I think we could dive into it.
Okay. Oxford University website dictionary defines plagiarism. This is my fun news voice, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, this is the definition succinctly as, quote, presenting someone else's work or ideas as your own with or without their consent. And there's an important part there. By incorporating it into your work without full acknowledgement, end quote. So that is plagiarism.
Yeah.
End of episode.
Yep, that's it. We've solved it. That's why we do it. They go on to highlight a few more specific conditions about this. This includes all published and unpublished work, regardless of whether it's in manuscript, printed, or in electronic form,
Yes.
whether or not it is done intentionally or not. We'll discuss that later. And it includes all media types. So computer code, illustrations, graphical depictions or graphical displays, books, journals, essays, lectures, you name it. If it's something that is a work by somebody else and you take it and put it out there as your own, is plagiarism. So the examples here under the banner of work can and should include everything that one can produce.
It essentially feels like if you're not the one who is saying it originally, then you should be citing your sources. Mm-hmm. For that sentence, I am citing the history of the English language.
I like that.
Of course, Oxford, as with likely all academic institutions, lists plagiarism as a disciplinary offense, except because it's Oxford, they spell offense OFFENCE, like off fence or of fence with a C, by orders of the Peaky Blinders.
What a great show.
I actually never watched it.
Is it Cillian Murphy?
I believe so.
That is just a wonderful actor. Like everything he's in is just brilliant.
He's incredible. Absolutely. But yeah, I haven't seen that one. That means that these notes were written by Alan.
Thanks, Alan. We appreciate you and your jokes, and we will have many setups. So let's talk about why the definition itself is not quite as exhaustive as we would need it to be. So it's not always as simple as submitting another's work as your own. And despite the fact that most people's assumptions jump to this form when they hear plagiarism, and you too might be saying to yourself, okay, well, as long as I don't pull that shady move, I'm good. It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, nonetheless, the website actually employs some behavior analysis logic in their plea for students to learn appropriate alternatives to careless forms of plagiarism, like the good behavior analysts that Oxford's administration is not. Proper education on professional composition is likely the best prevention against the more common forms of plagiarism, all of which will be discussed in this topic today. But if students and professionals in general can acquire these necessary skills, particularly during the earlier stages of their academic careers, it can help develop good practice that avoids any of these conflicts so that you're better prepared against the instance that it may or may not, I guess that it may happen intentionally, unintentionally, as we mentioned.
So plagiarism is not a thing that I ever thought about when I was in grad school. Like I was never like, I'm going to copy and paste this. I mean, I had moments where I was like, man, it would be so easy to just do this. But then I just felt like that would be bad. But I did have a student one time that literally copy and pasted an entire paper and turned it in.
Wow.
And when I confronted them about it, I was like, hey, this is straight up 100% match to somebody else's paper.
Yeah.
So much so that you even forgot to change your name in this. And I was like, what, like, did you just not do the, and he's like, I just thought I was going to get away with it. Like his in an email wrote,
wow,
I thought I was going to get away with it. And I was like, well, then I can't give you the benefit of the doubt. I have to forward this to the university. And obviously they were removed from the program.
Yeah.
For that, because it was like so blatant and so like, ugh.
Wow.
It was a real eye opener for me. I was like, wow, that is, they just did not care.
Yeah, what a gutsy move. Like, I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. I didn't think I was going to get caught. Dude, it goes through turn it in. 100% match. And it is not your name.
Actually, that's a good point that you raised there, is that there is a lot of software that has been developed to help catch and prevent and react to plagiarism when it occurs. And they're pretty impressively good. Yeah, Turn It In is the one that I've used. And even one time it was like crawling through like unpublished documents from other universities that had been submitted. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we found this match here. And I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, but that's like a common way to phrase a sentence like that. But the fact that you can even check that was impressive. So if you're wondering how this gets caught, it is because people make it their job to look for plagiarism. And there's like technology out there that does it automatically.
Yeah, bunch of narcs. Sorry. No, it's a good thing.
I didn't have as an extreme of an example as that, but I did have a student where like I got their paper and it was like 90%. They did put their name on it, but I went through looking at it and I was like, there's like 3 full paragraphs in a row where it's verbatim from this other document.
Yeah.
I was like, please rewrite this in your own words and try again.
Yeah, that's the thing is normally I would be like, can you try again? Like do this a different way. I'm not going to like, I get that students are like under a lot of pressure. So let's do better. Let's try again. I will give you the opportunity to do it rather than just be like, but that other guy was just like, no, I just didn't think I was going to get caught. Okay, you're done. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't with that. So you brought up verbatim. Do we want to talk about the different types of plagiarism that exist?
We should. That is an important point. Yes, because some of these I actually didn't realize that these would be considered plagiarism until reading what Alan found in his notes here.
Yeah. So verbatim talks about quoting something like written, vocal, or any other way, quoting it word for word without acknowledgement of its source. And so in order to kind of get around this, you have to have proper citation with quotations and or formatting relative to your profession. So in behavior analysis, we use the APA 7th edition currently, but the dude abides by whatever the dude's governing body decides. I love that quote from Alan. That's good.
Yes, that was good plagiarism there. It is important to identify where your own ideas and another's materials begin and end, because there can be a little bit of fuzzy gray lines there. Mm-hmm. And failing to do so may misrepresent the original author's material and can result in several consequences. We'll talk about some of those, but that can include defamation. It can, of course, include expulsion and, of course, even legal action.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another one is copying and pasting from the internet. That's where you blindly retrieve information from the internet, particularly from sources that may not be well established and fact-checked, and you fail to identify that source. So it's just literally you highlight something, you copy it, you paste it into whatever document or whatever thing you're using.
I think that's called Facebook.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's just literally, it's just, it's a share. It's fine. It's just a share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like someone else said this, so I'm going to regurgitate it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what it says, but it's a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've talked about this on the show before, but there was some evidence to suggest that most of when there were like news reports or things or blogs or anything, people read the headline, wouldn't read any of the content and would just forward the entire thing as if they had read it.
Yeah.
That's not plagiarism, but it is a problem because people are then sharing a bunch of incorrect information because anybody can write anything. And if they have a catchy enough headline, then it makes the rounds.
Right. Exactly. It's a real problem.
Yeah. And thus we live in the era of post-truth and alternative facts.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So we've talked about verbatim plagiarism. We've talked about copying and pasting from the internet plagiarism, but there's also an important one here that you might not think of, which is paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, just a brief definition. Everybody knows, but when you're summarizing work from someone else and you're using different words, that's fine, except that you have to identify the original source. And if you fail to do so and represent that you are in fact restating what someone else has said, then that misrepresents your work as being wholly original, which it's not. And again, like, it's perfectly acceptable to paraphrase, but you just have to do it with appropriate citation and credit giving, because a lot of times we are looking at what someone else has said, and you're developing your own. You're basically recapping that, or you're restating it to make your point, but you have to then say where you got that information from. Otherwise, you are ripping off someone's intellectual content. And so that does still count as plagiarism.
Yeah. So make sure you cite your sources. Another one that I didn't know really a lot about was collusion.
No collusion.
No collusion. So when you fail to disclose the exact extent of collaboration or existence of any collaboration when working with others. So basically, if you write a book and market yourself as the author, but the fact is that you're actually three monkeys on top of each other in a trench coat, then you need to cite all those monkeys. But you're lying. You're lying about who the author is of that bit of work. So like, if you write a book and somebody else also co-wrote that book with you, you would need to make sure, unless there's some kind of agreement somewhere, that you are officially citing that person. I mean, there's plenty of ghostwriters out there that still get credit for ghostwriting, but the author's name is put out on that. And that's a whole process. Collusion and ghostwriting are very different things.
That's a really good point. Yeah, essentially, I think, and we don't need to go into it, but I think in that ghostwriting, you've essentially already agreed that, like, as the writer of this, I am not taking credit for this work. And so it's okay for someone else to use this as their own.
Under these specific conditions.
And as long as they pay me money.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I was a little kid, I remember thinking of ghostwriting, thinking they were having actual ghosts writing. And I was like, how?
How did you do this? Yeah, Goosebumps is an example that I think about all the time.
Yes, exactly.
Also, what an appropriate series to have ghost writers on.
Right? Yeah, that really worked out. Okay. Another one, and this is maybe fairly obvious, but it's just inaccurate citation. And this comes in a large variety of formats, given whatever discipline you might be in. So it's important to familiarize yourself with the expected practices of your field and the professionals in your field and the way they go about citing within the parameters of whatever it might be, APA or MLA or something else. And being careless or ignorant of this is not considered an acceptable excuse. It is incumbent upon the writer to be familiar with the citation practices of the organization or the field or the guidelines that you use in that, so that you can appropriately give credit where and when credit is due.
Absolutely. Now, another one is the failure to acknowledge assistance. And that is defined as, quote, acknowledge other guidance which leads to substantive changes of content or approach, end quote. So essentially, it's absolutely acceptable to receive help from mentors or supervisors or others that proofread, but substantial contributions from others should be acknowledged. And so when we say substantial, that gets a little bit iffy, right? So here's an example. For instance, the professor who publishes a groundbreaking research article as a sole author, but received extensive written contributions of master students, would be misrepresenting the origins of the work involved. And so, like, if you're working on research projects and stuff, if you have somebody who's doing a literature review for your article or something like that, they should probably be listed as an author, because they're building the foundation for which you are writing that particular bit of work. Interestingly,
there's actually some ethics around also giving people credit who did not substantively contribute to the content of material.
Yeah.
Is like there is an ethical consideration about that as well. If they really don't deserve authorship on something, it's a problem. You don't want to oversight or undercite. There's a nice Goldilocks zone of just right amount of citation.
Right, absolutely.
For including people. Yeah, that's a really great catch. All right, so one more, or two more, I guess the second to last one, is use of material written by professional agencies or other persons. And essentially, this is submitting work composed of someone else on your own behalf or by professional agencies. Further, it is an offense to compose the work that someone else is going to submit and then lie about it. And meaning that essentially you beat them to the punch, but they did it first. A quick Google search that Alan did is probably flagged now, but that's his dedication to the podcast mission. You know, he's good like that. Yields endless opportunities to purchase a pre-written essay. And I bet it pays well and times are tough, but it's a jerk move. No self-respecting academic should ever use or compose such a thing by purchasing these pre-written essays. You'd be much more respected with a crap essay than someone else's perfect one.
Absolutely. Now, the final one we do have to talk about is auto-plagiarism. This is a tricky one.
Yeah.
You cannot submit work for one assignment that you have submitted in the past for other assignments. So, like, if you write a paper, you cannot submit that same paper for a different reason and stuff like that. So that's essentially, like, you see this a lot in academic spaces. You can't just basically like reuse the same paper over and over and over again for different purposes. You can make reference to your earlier work and you can cite it properly the same way that you might for another individual's materials, but essentially a produced work should serve as its own standing produced work. And then any sort of kind of offshoots of that would be cited as a reference to that original work.
I have two quick things on that. One is that in my experience, most professional journals require you to specifically check a box saying, I have not submitted this elsewhere, specifically for this reason. And two is just a consideration that a lot of people end up getting recruited to sort of present their same ideas repeatedly. And they'll more or less have the same message, but they do try and generally restate it in different ways when it gets submitted. And so they'll often be like, here's sort of an update on this. And they're still citing themselves most of the time, which is important. Sort of saying like, look, said this before, but you're right. Like this sort of auto plagiarism thing can be a real thing. And that you want to just be mindful of the fact that as a consideration, some people end up having they just say the same sorts of things over and over. And they're not plagiarizing those instances, but they should be citing themselves.
Yeah.
And the fact that like, your work should be original every time that it's submitted.
With that being said, I think it's probably a good time to take a break and listen to entirely original ads from people who want your money. So we'll be back.
All right, so we are back and let's talk about why it matters to be not plagiarists.
Yeah.
I think that's a word. I just made it up. I'm wholly original.
Plagiarist is a good word. It's a good name for a band.
That is a good name for a
plagiarist.
Band. You know what? First of all, it strikes me that'd be a great name for a cover band.
I imagine that it probably is too, which is even better.
Yes. And second of all, I really, for some reason, that strikes me as like a sort of indie folk rock sort of vibe with that name.
Dave Haas, if you like music, he has a song called Plagiarist. There is also a band called Plagiarist.
Oh, sweet. Are they a cover band?
They currently have 2 monthly listeners. It doesn't look like it.
Okay.
I don't know what they sound like, so we won't shout them out right now, but just know that they exist. And there's also a band called The Plagiarists.
Okay. They probably sound like other bands would be my guess.
Yeah, I would imagine. And probably cite those resources. Hopefully. No, they don't.
Well, yeah, they're plagiarists. They don't cite anything.
Yeah, come on.
They're like, I wrote the song Learn to Fly. That was all me. Stairway to Heaven. I did
that. That was me. It was all me. Beast of Burden is mine. It's all mine. So why does this matter? Honesty, integrity, particularly in academia, has been culturally selected, or basically culturally important, as that kind of behavior that preserves the foundations of scholarship. Essentially, what we're saying is that we need honesty, integrity to ensure that the foundations of academic work and scholarship continue. And any breach of these principles fails to demonstrate the true scholarly process of scientific discovery and sharing of information. So it weakens those structures and those foundations.
Yeah.
And so while the procedures to achieve these are rigid and sometimes very nitpicky, I mean, both of us have been through those types of institutions and seen that it can be very nitpicky.
Yeah.
They strive to keep any given field within acceptable boundaries. They want to make sure that it's honest, it's accurate, it's original, and it continues to maintain and support those foundations of good scholarship.
And Oxford University, again, our go-to here, they offer that one of the problems with engaging in plagiarism is that it, quote, undermines the ethos of academic scholarship while avoiding an essential part of the learning process, end quote, which I think is dead on. Like, that's exactly one of the main problems here is you are missing an opportunity to learn something by engaging in the process of generating content, which you will then get feedback on. And I know I ended that sentence in a preposition, and I'm sorry.
That's fine.
But that's how we talk, okay? We're American.
We're allowed.
Yeah, our language has devolved, and that's where we're at. Think about it, like, I was sort of trying to really wrap my head around, like, really practically, like, what are the outcomes here when you have someone who steals someone else's work? And because, like, ultimately, I think if it just is content that gets out there and then it gets out there again, and most people aren't even looking at the citations when they read it anyway, like, does it really matter? And I think that it does, both for the reasons that have already been stated, but also because there is this whole thing of, like, do you as a person who's generating content actually have the credentials to then fulfill later in a position where you are maybe mentoring someone else, or you are teaching, or you have some other employment that is rested on the fact that you created this content, because you'd otherwise be sort of tricking people into fulfilling on a position you do not have the experience to fulfill.
Right.
And it's like, it's also just not that hard to come up with your own words and at least cite your sources. Like,
that's all.
That's not that difficult. Yeah. Like, because they're not even saying it has to be all you. You have to stand on the shoulders of the people who came before you. And as long as you give them that credit, then people can show like, okay, what part of this was you? What part of this was them? How were you able to use that work to further our understanding of these things?
I think that's perfect, right? Like, I think about plagiarism in a more extreme example of if I'm skipping out on my work, right? If I'm skipping out on my opportunities to learn and I go in to be a surgeon, then I come across a real scenario where I was like, oh, I didn't write that paper. I don't remember anything about that, or whatever it might be. You know, you end up in a space where you are grossly outside of your expertise. And that creates so many other important problems. I'm not saying a single paper is going to be the thing that prevents you from being the expert, but it could be the difference between knowing more about a subject and really not knowing anything about it. And that can really change your perspective and your experience towards whatever that phenomenon is.
Yeah. So stop stealing.
Stop stealing. So we mentioned earlier intentional versus unintentional, or as Alan likes to put it from the Oxford website, reckless plagiarism. And I think it's worth taking some time to kind of differentiate between those, because a lot of times people don't really mean to plagiarize. They might accidentally do it, or they might just not cite something or whatever it might be. But there is a difference between intentional and reckless plagiarism.
Yeah, the sort of like, there's like malicious plagiarism kind of in a way, and like careless is sort of the two synonyms I would use.
I picture reckless just being like somebody's just copying, pasting from like a whole bunch of random places and then like just putting it into one document, and like none of it is intelligible at all. Like you can't read it or follow it, and there's no plot line. And that's how you get Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs. Except he didn't plagiarize. He was just on a drug-fueled like just bender. So like none of his stuff makes sense. For different reasons.
I thought you were going to say that's how we got the Bible.
I mean, there are some people that think Naked Lunch is a Bible of sorts. So I guess close. Sorry for those people who like the Bible. I know that's offensive, but you know, it's fine.
Well, and I think there's certainly, honestly, there's probably something to unpack in a future discussion about the Bible and like what we do know about the writers. And because I mean, there's like interesting stuff. There's the Dead Sea Scrolls would be cool to unpack, and
the Book of Judas.
There are people who get their doctorate degree in biblical scholarship and history. Like there's like a lot of dedicated time on that subject. So,
oh, most definitely.
Yeah. I want to meet the person who got their degree on the Da Vinci Code as a piece of literature.
Yeah. Oh, there is somebody out there. There's a Dan Brown scholar out there.
Right. All right. So anyway, we were talking about intentional versus careless or reckless plagiarism. Obviously, with intentional, what we're saying here is that you understand the regulations have been violated, that you are breaking the rules, and you still persist to gain advantage in the examination by engaging in plagiarism. That's in quotes, but it doesn't say who the citation is rooted to. So I'm going to say Alan plagiarized.
Yeah. Way to go, man.
Yeah. Now, as we discussed in the example of Shane's student, when you are intentionally plagiarizing, then there is likely a higher penalty that this is done essentially in bad faith. It lends more to a reinforcement sort of outcome circumstance in that if one gets away with it, then it is more likely to happen again in the future. So if this student of yours had submitted and you didn't bother to check turn it in, and you're like, wow, what a brilliant piece of scholarly writing. You're fantastic. Here's an A. Then that kid was definitely going to plagiarize again in the future. And that's, one of the reasons we try and stop plagiarism from happening.
And what ends up happening, too, is like, so I plagiarize, so I'm doing less work, which means I get to spend more time with family or friends or doing fun activities. It only makes it so that behavior is more likely to happen. So like, you know, when I'm grading Chad's paper and it says Mariah, we've got some different conversations to have, simply because they had some other competing factors that got in the way and led them to that space, you know?
True.
Or they've done it before and just got away with it more than once. That couldn't have been the first time he did it.
It's a very fair point, actually. Yeah, there definitely was some level of experience in there.
Yeah.
Although not enough to put the right name on it.
Yeah. Or like just take a paper and just change all the words. I mean, I'm not saying do that, but like it is one of those things where it's like you had the entire paper and it was done. Like, couldn't you just rephrase a lot of that? Anyway, now reckless plagiarism is the understanding that there was work to be done and reason to be cautious, but no action was taken to actually alleviate the risk and act appropriately in that space. So essentially what ends up happening is I know that I have to do work. I know I have to do something different.
Right.
And I am going to be aware and cautious about what I'm turning in, but I didn't take enough to prevent the issue of plagiarism. Like I didn't cite enough. I didn't rephrase or paraphrase enough. I didn't do enough to combat that. A lot of times this results in a lesser penalty because there's a little bit of carelessness that goes along with it.
Right.
And the appropriate action might be acknowledging the oversight and correcting the citation. Sometimes it's that simple. It's like, hey, I messed up. Let me go ahead and fix this real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And as one might imagine, the context in which these things occur, intentional or reckless, they might vary. A couple of oversights in a rough draft, a comment embedded in Word that says find citation and then doesn't have the actual citation.
Right.
Those are fine. You know, it happens. These are parts of the editing process, and therefore we might consider a distinction of plagiarism occurring concretely after publication, but it's debatable. This hasn't been defined that way yet, but it might be worth having as a conversation.
Yeah. So there are consequences. Institutions have usually some policies and procedures around engaging in plagiarist behavior. And so their institutions, they might have different ways they attend to this, right? Some may have like a zero tolerance policy no matter what, and you lose your status as a student. Others might give you an opportunity to correct it and kind of like rework on this. But there are varying ways to go about this. And some of these could include suspension from the school, expulsion from the school. I've seen the expulsion part of it. I haven't seen suspensions just yet, but I also work in an online environment, so it's hard to see when somebody's not really present.
Yeah.
Public defamation I've not seen, but I know that like in events where plagiarism has kind of become more rampant and maybe somebody took the steps to address it before,
Yeah.
I could see public defamation become a bigger issue. Or failing a course, right? You might plagiarize and it's in the syllabus that says, hey, plagiarism is zero tolerance. Any instance of plagiarism that's caught, automatic 0 for the course. And that those are different examples of stuff that might come up as a result of this.
Of course, if you are not necessarily at an institution but are plagiarizing, you might also be taken to court. So there might be some legal action that occurs and it might be executed. Just kidding.
Yeah, your career might be.
Depends on the country. Yeah, your career might be. If you're in North Korea, you probably would be, or Russia. You know.
Or if you're a musician in the United States, your career might be done. I mean, what's the last song you heard by Robin Thicke?
He did do a song on The Masked Singer in this last season. It's funny you say that because I was actually thinking, I was like, I feel like music has just become it's self-plagiarism at this point. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very strange. I mean, there's so many like simple the chords that you hear. So just so everybody knows, the same chords that are in "Damn It" by Blink-182 are also used in New Found Glory's "Hit or Miss." So it's the same chord progression, which is also the same chord progression that is in, I believe, Green Day's "When I Come Around."
Okay. If you're talking about the same ones, you can Google this because I was curious because most songs anymore use about the same sort of chords, the same sort of tempo, the same sort of rhythms, often similar like melodies, etc. And a lot of people have sort of written this off as, sorry, this is like sort of side tangent on music.
No, it's good though.
A lot of people have written this off as like, well, there's just only so many notes. And while that is technically true, and there's like only so many combinations that are going to make it into popular media. And I think I've heard some research saying that music is basically becoming increasingly homogenous, which I would 100% believe. Yeah. With like the range of melodies and that sort of thing. They've sort of written that off as being it, but I'm sort of like, it's unfortunate, but that is sort of the position we're in, is like essentially where we are reaching, like music is becoming increasingly homogenous or the same. And that eventually it'll just be the same song was just released every time with different lyrics, and even the lyrics, and like there's so many mashups that are out there that just like take this one melody from the song and put it in here, and they give credit in those instances, but it's a pretty self-plagiarizing. And I tend to, we talked about music before, like I tend to like music that's like really unexpected, like it just does stuff. Actually, fun shout out, because I know most of what our listeners listen to. The newest Kendrick Lamar album came out relatively recently, and Kendrick Lamar very much shuns traditional song structure in almost 100%. Every track on that album. Yeah. It's so like avant-garde sort of rap. Yeah. It's pretty interesting. So like if you're interested in something really original, Kendrick Lamar, way to go. Yeah. So 100%. Bonus recommend. Yeah. In there. Anyway, sorry, we're like a little off topic. As behavior analysts talking about this, other consequences include getting away with it, getting out of doing work, getting access to higher grades. There's like lots of consequences.
Public recognition.
All kinds of things. So There are the consequences that mean you stop doing it, and consequences meaning you keep doing it. And there's there's a healthy mix. Now, you just had to listen to my voice for a long time. I would like to give you, listener, a break from my voice and instead listen to someone who gets paid to read advertisements. Okay, now, who on earth would engage or do this horrible plagiarism thing? Who would do such a thing?
Let's use your imagination for a second. Imagine an elephant in a dress riding a razor scooter over a rainbow, drinking a White Claw and humming the flying theme to E.T. Okay. All right. Now images in your head. I hope that was fun. I hope that was just a fun exploration. So thank you, Alan, for
lovely.
that. That's clearly his idea and not mine.
Yeah. I would love to be in Alan's mind for just a moment.
Seriously, me too. I think it's so fascinating.
Yeah. We get these glimpses of it and they're beautiful. It's just White Claw is thematic, and so is the show 24. But, you know.
I feel like Alan is it's just a perfect example of a beautiful mind that like we need more of. So thank the stars that we have an Alan on this planet. And then we get to live at the same time that like we had a David Bowie and now we've got an Alan.
That's right. Yeah. You probably what I said. I would like to thank Alan's parents and a bottle of wine for giving us Alan. So back to plagiarism. It's so easy to say, I would never do that. Right? We're talking about plagiarism, or to try and imagine a stereotype or profile of someone who would do this type of thing, is this plagiarism thing. But imagine a reason that fits into each one of the sort of motives that we're familiar with and the incentives for why people plagiarize. These are all familiar situations we have likely encountered. Mm-hmm. It doesn't justify the behavior. We're not condoning. We're just trying to understand and explain.
Right.
With the explanation comes clarity of the variables. And with the clarity of the variables, one might be able to change those components for the better, learning, teaching, changing, growing, etc. Right? So fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And because we cite appropriate here at why we do what we do, that line originates courtesy of one William Shatner of Harry Potter fame.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. So we should talk about there are so many people that just rage quit our podcast. There's like,
yes,
they're like, no.
That's right. I hear emails entering our inbox, even though nobody has heard this yet.
This hasn't come out. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Leonard Nimoy's like, why not me? Why didn't you reference me? So let's talk about some basic examples of why somebody might engage in this type of behavior. So first is avoidance, right? As the end of the semester is coming, the deadline's approaching, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of stressors. So I end up buying an essay online, and then what ends up happening is I get to avoid a failing grade, specifically for a lack of an assignment submission, right? So I don't get a 0 in my grade book. I have avoided that bad grade, and it's just as easy as like I got relief from that circumstance, right? It was really aversive, it was really bad. I did this, now it's gone.
Yeah, I was going to say, you also get to alleviate the stress that maybe was associated with that. You get to avoid spending the amount of time it would take to complete on that. Yeah, definitely easy to understand that incentive. Mm-hmm. Another one is that you might get attention for it. So there is a call for papers on ethical behavior and a special edition of a journal. And so you submit your paper created by your doc students, listing yourself as the only author. And when you do this, then you get public recognition for the important contribution that you have made to ethical decision making. What beautiful irony that is. And that, I think, very thing or something very similar to it has actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, like I've got a friend right now who's going through that exact thing. Like they developed an entire curriculum, and a PhD advisor took that and is marketing around as solely their work, and it's become a real problem. So like if you think that this does not happen, it absolutely does happen, unfortunately.
And absolutely has happened recently too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this is a thing.
Like I was talking about that last week.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, like, people are often in a position when they know that their work has been plagiarized, thinking, like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't have any recourse. So we do need, I think, we need some like whistleblower protection type things for this.
Yeah, 100%. Now, another possible outcome for this would be monetary gain, right? So going back to the example that I just used, you might have something like an essay contest on being a model citizen where you can win cash prizes. So you submit an essay that you wrote years ago when you were an amateur expert on model citizenry, and with some material you swiped from Reddit that nobody will ever recognize, right? So it's like buried deep in the boards of Reddit.
Yeah, it's the 4chan board.
Yeah. So that you get a cash prize and you get recognition as an expert on model citizenry. And the sweet irony of that, right? The idea like that you have done all this like shady stuff just so you can be a model citizen, but you get monetary gain. And that's something that does drive people.
Another final reason here is the sort of self-enjoyment or the pleasure of doing it, I guess. So you get a book deal. You write like Cormac McCarthy without conventional punctuation just to be a butthole. And the money means nothing. You simply thrive on feeling like Cormac McCarthy. And who wouldn't?
Right.
You know? And you compulsively refuse to use conventional punctuation. Again, unfortunately, maybe you wrongly mentioned other published works, but still insisted on writing like Cormac McCarthy to be a butthole. Side note, No Country for Old Men is pretty good. I would actually amend Ellen's recommendation here to say it is very good. Blood Meridian is a challenging read. I have not read that one, but I will trust Ellen's opinion. Is it? Okay.
It's dark.
And also The Road is so sad.
It really is. Also very dark.
Yes. The movie was pretty good adaptation, but the book was better, obviously.
Yeah. It was, they were able to get away with more in the book, clearly.
Right. Yeah. Just a lot more story there.
Yeah. So in sum, not all crimes are created equally. And we know this to be true when we examine the complexities of the justice system and how laws of the land vary around the world or even within our own country. Whereas blasphemy of religious or political figures is widely acceptable in the United States, good luck in other countries. That's not going to happen. Whereas gun possession is a religious obsession in the United States, good luck in other countries. Whereas gum chewing is widely accepted pretty much everywhere. Don't you dare do it in Singapore. It's a whole thing.
Heard that.
And while you might love dealing weed to your buddies in the U.S., don't do it in the Philippines. Their maniac president gets off executing drug dealers and smugglers of any kind. The bottom line of all of this is that everything is a matter of perspective. We don't agree universally on what constitutes a crime, plagiarism included, let alone the severity of each instance. Further, even if and when we agree, such as in academia, that such behavior is unacceptable and has operationally defined it, we have gone so far as to define that thoroughly, as is the case with plagiarism. What do we do when it still happens? That is the challenge that we run into.
Yeah, and we are building up essentially to what we think is a reasonable reaction to this in most circumstances. We've already mentioned some of the outcomes of plagiarism, and I think we're more or less on board with those, aside from execution. But generally speaking, I think it does make a lot of sense, and it does depend on the context in which it occurred. Now, if you can't cite the line, don't do the crime. This line is 100% now Alan's intellectual property to loan on this episode. So Alan will receive a royalty for that.
Yes.
Yeah. So ethical question to ponder, though. Do we let these plagiarizers back in the sandbox where they already peed and we're already like, gross, get out of the sandbox, stop peeing in here, with reentry tasks and expectations, or with some sort of probationary period? Do we let them back in? Does context matter? Again, thinking of motives and what the conditions under which it happened. If we, as behavior analysts, as psychologists, and as compassionate humans, can't employ the same logic with an infraction that stings like plagiarism, how are we to focus the philosophy on more severe matters like self-injury or aggression or other criminal activities? If you're someone who supports offering a way back into society for individuals who have completed a prison sentence, for example, maybe consider asking yourself if you would allow the same leniency in your own field or area, whatever it might be. Can someone come back into the community without a scarlet letter scarred upon them or being branded a heretic? Just food for thought. Just think about, like, what do we need to do to allow, like, there is appropriate recompense, if you will, for that action. And now we have some safeguards in place to ensure that it won't happen again.
I do think that it's important to have a reentry criterion.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Don't shoot the dog, as Karen Pryor would say.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think when we start analyzing the context in which somebody might plagiarize, I think it's important to recognize that our education system itself is not equitable. So it is very possible somebody entering into a program where plagiarism is a concern, they may not have the opportunity or the skill set to have ever been exposed to what to do to avoid it. So it is really important to recognize that, like, culturally speaking, that our education system is not built to serve every single person. And I would be interested to see what the levels of plagiarism look like across demographics.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine that it's probably indicative of an inequitable culture.
That's a very fair point. Yeah. Cool.
So, do you want to take a constructional perspective on this? How to build a skill? How to avoid plagiarism? You want to dive into that a little bit?
Totally. Of all places, the University of New South Wales Sydney's website depicts different infractions of academic integrity as a result of skill deficits. So, a different approach here. with an alternative strategy for each one. So for example, or here's a few examples, if you have poor note taking, then to build an alternative strategy, or I guess a replacement strategy, is devote note taking systems. If you have underdeveloped writing skills, work to improve your writing. Maybe take a writing class, for example. Poor time management, learn to use your time effectively. You might recruit some people to help with that. And intellectual insecurity, find your own voice, which often comes just with practice. Practice writing, practice figuring out what it feels like for you to write and generate content.
Yeah, because I think that's something that people, they don't pay attention to a lot, is the way that you write is going to vary. I'm not going to write the same way as some of the academics in our field write. Like, I'm never going to write like Skinner. Mostly because I like a little bit more flourish in my writing, but I do also because he's not known for that. We'll say that, but I do think he's just a far more intelligent person than I am, and just can write more academically than I can. So all of these things that we've kind of mentioned sound like they're easier said than done, and they are easier said than done. And while it's great that these are tips that are available, and some more in-depth resources are available specifically on the school and other schools' websites, it raises that question of how much this is emphasized to students and at what level of education such instruction begins. So, for example, undergraduates might seem like a logical target, but why not start in high school? In fact, why not start injecting some of this instruction into middle school assignments?
How about when they're born?
When they're born?
Right out the gates.
It's like, stop copying people. So right from the very beginning. There isn't really a good or bad starting line to build academic integrity. And if we were to outline the many prerequisite skills that contribute to the behavior that contradicts to plagiarism, we might be able to more comprehensively include that in a general curricula as a way to set up a lot of preventative strategies.
Yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense for if the child's first word are citation mommy 2022.
I do like that.
All right. And so as we mentioned, sort of what are our reentry criteria? What should be the outcome of this? How should we treat these people? Should we allow a benign mistake and allow for redemption, or is it banished forever, one and done? What's the threshold here? Okay. And also thinking about what we can do to prevent this. So with any other type of action that we're trying that might be problematic or challenging, it will likely persist unless there's some kind of outcome that prevents it from happening, because if it's occurring at all, it's because there's motive and incentive already there, right? And so there has to be some sort of like punishment or something else or redirection to help move it away from what they're doing. Right now, this does not seem to be solving the problem. We've already talked about you have expulsion. You have public defamation, things of that nature. Those are consequences that are out there, and nevertheless, plagiarism still occurs. So can we instead replace it with a functional alternative? What can we do instead? Now, assuming that most individuals have inherently noble intentions, we think that most of the time people like mean well, or they have some sort of rationale for what they did with their work. And so we should give them the benefit of the doubt that minor infractions, again, things like just failing to cite properly, not necessarily ripping off whole pages, but there's sort of a level there, differ in severity from that sort of blatant reproduction of another's intellectual property or published work as their own. Thus, making sure that during the editing process, there are many points of feedback, there's revision, oversight, and particularly with like younger academics and professionals, we might build these skills to make it less likely for them to even try ever plagiarizing or even doing that in the first place later in their career, where the consequences of doing so might be much more substantial and severe and affect their institution where they work at large. So we want to set this up so early on it's impressed upon them the necessity for being original and citing your sources.
I think the thing is there are questions to still unpack within that, right? Like, so if you're working in a psychology program or you're working in a space where you're in a helping profession and you have somebody who so blatantly plagiarizes, that calls into question their own integrity as they go forward. And you kind of ask, is this the kind of practitioner I'd want in my field? And that's a question that I balance, right? Like, so you balance like that fundamental attribution error, this person's dishonest, with something like, oh, they engage in a problematic behavior that we should have the opportunity to shape and improve. So there is a lot of people I see, especially when it comes to like restorative justice and the idea of those reentry criterion, go back to this person is blank versus this person did blank. And I think if we reframe it as always, this person did something that was a problem, that gives the person the opportunity to fix whatever that problem might have been.
Absolutely. So that kind of leads us really nicely to what do we do about it and why? And this, I think, is sort of a nice this sort of will work as take-home points for this topic.
Yeah.
I think the first thing to acknowledge here is that we need academic work. And I would argue we need fictional content, works of art, written compositions of every type and at every time as part of our culture. Like, it's fun and we like having it around. And it's okay to be influenced by others who came before you. In fact, it's kind of the only way to even explain original content is what we've learned from those before us. But just give credit where it's due and always cite your references where applicable.
Yeah. And so how might you do that? In behavior analysis, we can incorporate what we know about instructional design, or like how we design courses and all that, to manufacture a comprehensive writing curriculum that tackles a variety of topics, including APA 7th edition citations and general referencing practices, be it with direct quotes or paraphrasing or whatever that might be. Now, it's a generally nuanced concept that requires a lot of familiarization, often more than can be consolidated into any amount of training modules at the beginning of one's academic experience at any level. We are only human, and therefore what ends up happening is we are going to have the occasional error. It's to be expected. We are going to mess up every now and again. Now, we should allow for corrections, embracing the humility of growth and self-editing. It could be a valuable skill to model and shape with younger academics and professionals in the field, so that later, under more stringent circumstances, they're able to do the right thing. The thing that I try to leave everybody with when it comes to plagiarism and academic honesty and all that is I'll never forget entering my graduate program. And one of the videos that we had to watch was about academic dishonesty. And it's funny because the guy, his name is Tom, he looks like me from the future. So he's got long hair and he's got a big beard. We took a picture together and we're like, oh, I'm just him from the past. So we're just like time travel. So it's a real weird issue of Looper where this guy's much smarter than me, but maybe I'll be as smart as him over time. But I'll never forget him talking about the idea of plagiarism and academic dishonesty and cheating on tests and stuff. And he just said, you're entering a field where you're helping people. What gives you the right to do that? And why would you cheat yourself in getting the knowledge to help somebody to improve their own quality of life? I never forget that. Of all the videos that I watched and all the lectures and all the continuing education, I still remember that from 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Specifically him saying, who do you think you are to change somebody's behavior, even with the most integrity, let alone somebody who's going to plagiarize or cheat or any of those things? And so that sticks with me quite a bit.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. I like that. One of the things I like in there too that you said is if you plagiarize, you are cheating yourself out of an opportunity to learn something. And so it's not just the fact that there might be those, as we mentioned, the sort of outcomes that recognition or you get out of stress or whatnot, but you also are preventing yourself from learning something meaningful. And I feel like having thought a lot about, we talked recently in sort of an atheism episode, the fact that we recognize we have this one life and what do we do with it? And having thought a lot about that, I feel like to me, one of the things that is of a huge value in directing my behavior in life is learning. I want to always be learning. I want to learn new things. I want to just be learning all the time. And so I think that cheating myself out of opportunities to learn is just an anathema to who I am as a person. I want to always be learning because I feel like that direction makes the most sense to me out of what to get out of this life, is to learn as much as I possibly can before I ultimately wither away and die.
I have a question for you.
Shoot.
What does anathema mean?
Thank you for putting me on the spot like that.
What are friends for? What can I say?
That's right. You can think of it as something or someone that one vehemently dislikes or hates. That comes from, I think, the Oxford Dictionary, trying to cite my source here. But I've also heard of anathema as something that's it's counterproductive to what your goals even are. So I'll actually, the very first time I heard that was in a lyrics by Thrice.
Oh, yeah.
And they were talking about drowning and how tears were anathema in drowning because of sort of you're already in water and just creating more water, sort of the idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, being this sort of it's counterproductive and also something that you hate. So
yeah. I also like that the second definition under Oxford is a formal curse by a pope. That's real heavy. So I do enjoy that.
Very specific. Yeah. Anyway, that was he was really good catching me the way he did.
Yeah. No, that was good.
Beautiful.
I had my moments.
Yeah.
So do you have any other take-home points? Because I think I would like to leave this episode with a quote.
I think I do have one more, which is just thinking about the fact that whenever anybody does anything at all, we always want to consider what the repercussions that make sense in terms of Are they likely to reoffend? What were the conditions under which it occurred in the first place? How can we move forward with allowing this person to still have the highest amount of access to like freedoms and positive outcomes where they're not also endangering themselves or others or discrediting people or others in their institutions. And so like, I think I always like the reentry idea and what that means and looking for practical and utilitarian sort of solutions for this problem that are not just like, you did it once, you're out forever. I think there needs to be a way back where we teach appropriate alternatives.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So I don't have any take-home points beyond that because I think that's good. So To my quote, and I will actually cite this. This is from Kurt Vonnegut from the book Mother Night. The quote is, "We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be."
That's awesome. That fits so well.
And that's why I was like, as for all you plagiarists out there, make sure you cite that. But I do think that was like kind of a relevant point to all of this, you know?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to let that quote weigh heavy on your mind as you listen to or ignore some advertisements. All right. Hopefully you were able to tune that out successfully, or maybe you purchased something that you really needed and you just got an advertisement that was directly targeted at you. And if you didn't get an advertisement, it is because the advertisement gods don't want to sell you anything right now. And that's on you, buddy.
That's on you, pal.
But we do have some recommendations for you.
Recommendations.
So I have to strongly recommend Stranger Things Season 4.
Amen.
I will say that for those of you who are not used to gore, there's some body horror stuff in here that's pretty rough right off the bat from the very first episode. But I will say I have enjoyed the new characters that have come in. I've enjoyed the dynamics of the season. Really enjoy Eddie. Even though he's like kind of not likable at first. I actually really enjoy him.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just think that they've done a really good job with this season. It's big. Every episode is like an hour and a half.
Yes.
And it's not done yet. So I finished the first 7 episodes and have really, really loved it. So I hope that you all go spend some time watching it.
I second the recommendation. If you haven't seen it already, at the time that this comes out, but if you're like on the fence about it, I actually think, and this might be blasphemous, but this might be my favorite season of Stranger Things.
So far, it's really hooked me more than the other ones have, quite a bit.
Yeah. And season 1 was great. It totally roped me in. But man, this season is crushing it. I am just all about it. So,
yeah. And every episode has pulled opened up new questions about stuff that I'm like, now that's a whole nother layer I didn't think about the Upside Down. And this is all. So,
yeah.
Anyway, and there's a really good cameo in it where I'm like, oh, that's perfect. Like this person being haunted by nightmares. Perfect. That makes sense.
All right, I am recommending a game with an easy to pronounce name. Just kidding, it's not. It is called Floriferous.
Yes, very difficult.
Yeah, it's a flowers game. I'm specifically recommending Floriferous with the early spring mini expansion, and this is from the publisher Pencil First Games. I actually recommended another one of their games, 2 other of their games, Herbaceous and the Whatnot Cabinet. Floriferous I actually saved for third because it is my favorite of all of their games. I think it is one of their most well-designed games. I think it offers a decent amount of strategy, but it's quick. You can play it in like 20 or 30 minutes. And it's clever and intuitive with a decent amount of strategy. And it's not that hard to learn or to teach. And it doesn't take very long. So yeah, that is my recommendation, is Floriferous. I think I'll briefly explain that essentially what you're trying to do is collect points by positioning yourself in such a way that you either get first pick or you get exactly the kind of card that you're trying to acquire. And so you're sort of balancing like, do I go first or do I get the best flower, which might be taken if I don't go first, right?
Yeah.
And so you just take turns doing that throughout the game, trying to complete some like secret objectives and that sort of thing. It is a beautiful, the art's really, really nice. And I think that the game design itself is really clever. So that's my pick. Yeah. And I have a link in the notes for that.
Perfect. Yeah. Check it out. Because we're going to start doing board games more, I think. It'll be fun.
There's so many. If you happen to be in the Reno area at the time that this comes out, this is coming out 3 days before the Reno Area Gaming Expo Convention, or RageCon, as it is called, is nice. 3 days of board games. If you're in the Reno area or during that time, this is June 24th, 25th, 26th, then you should definitely come check that out. And I also forgot to mention at the top of this, Shane, that I want to acknowledge that, first of all, this last week was Juneteenth. So happy Juneteenth to everybody.
Yes.
And also the day that this comes out is National Kissing Day. So
there you go. Smooches to everybody.
Smooches to everybody who consents to smooches.
Yes.
It's also Positive Media Day. And I think that as an episode on plagiarism, we handled that pretty well as being positive.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was not as demonizing as it could have been.
So you may celebrate those holidays or celebrations and privately or publicly or however you do it. But yeah, happy Kissing Day and Positive Media Day and Juneteenth to everybody.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode and you're like, man, where has this been my whole life? I wish I had more why we do what we do in my life from here on out. You may join us on Patreon. From there, you'll get some bonus stuff. You'll get videos. You get access to discounts on merch. You can get notes. You can get early episodes, ad-free episodes, behind-the-scenes episodes, stuff like that. Otherwise, if you don't want to join us on Patreon, then you can instead support us by leaving us a rating and a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Subscribe, tell all your friends, post about it on social media, do some skywriting or something. All of that helps us out. Also, if you want something more tangible in hand, you can buy mugs, beanies, shirts, jackets, stickers, I think a water bottle, all kinds of stuff that you can get that's from our merch store. Just go to our website, www.wwdpodcast.com, and click on the store link, and then you can buy all kinds of cool stuff there. Finally, if you would like to tell us about your experiences with plagiarism or catching someone plagiarizing or something, correct us on something we got wrong, if you'd like to tell us about a board game or a TV show that you're currently into, you should definitely reach out to us. You can contact us on all the social media platforms or email us directly at info@wwdpodcast.com. We really like to hear from everybody, and we're more than happy to share things that are passed along as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, please. We love feedback, good and bad, and everything in between.
And before I move on from that, I need to thank the people who help make this show possible. Those are our Patreon supporters, which include Amanda, Brad, The Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kim, Kostia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie, all of our Patreon people. And also thank you so much to my team. That includes Justin, Selena, Kyle. Thank you, Alan, for your awesome notes and wit and gracing us with your brilliance today. And of course, thank you for recording with me today, Shane.
Anytime.
Shane just took a bow. It was lovely. Thank you, everyone who is listening, for lending us your ears for your time. And I think that is all I have for closing statements. Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add?
Nope. I think that's everything that everybody said.
Great. We are done. And this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.